Today, August 20th, is the feast of St. Bernard, who was a great light in the church. He convinced about 25 of his friends and relatives to join him in joining a Cistercian monastery, which was kind of on its last leg. He breathed life into monasticism in the Middle Ages throughout Europe. The breath of his spirit, the depth of his spiritual wisdom, and his practical commitment to living out the rule of St. Benedict truly transformed the church. His writings are a treasure trove of mysticism for us. Something that's always struck me is his 4 levels of loving. So he says the first level of loving is self-loving self for the sake of self. And it's kind of a basic level of self-preoccupation, self-absorption, egoism. However, he makes an important point that in one sense we're called to value ourselves before we can ever move beyond ourselves. So it's not pure selfishness, but that's the level we start at. Self-concern, self-awareness, the needs of the ego. We see that in childhood development. Second stage is the self-loving God for the sake of self. So we start loving God, we start going to Mass, we start praying, but oftentimes that may be motivated by what we get out of it. Lord, I need these things, and we give our laundry list of intercessions. Or I like the warm feeling I get when I go to Mass. I feel good. Those aren't bad things, but it's still kind of practicing faith and loving God for the sake of self. Third level is loving God for God's sake. And that's where we go through this purification, often of suffering, often of kind of a dark night of prayer. And we come to the realization that practicing our faith, praying, being faithful to the Lord and the teachings of the church are good things in and of themselves. So even when they're difficult, even when we don't feel any consolation, even when we're just kind of hanging there in the dark night of faith without any sort of comfort, but we remain faithful, that's loving God for God's sake. And often, I think God removes consolation from us to kind of purify our faith and our desire. Maybe he asks us, do you love me for my sake, or do you love me just for your sake? We probably all have friends that we only hear from when they need something. That's kind of the point. So you'd think that would be the highest point, loving God for God's sake. But Bernard takes it one step further, and he says the 4th phase of loving is coming back full circle and loving self but for God's sake. That we come to an authentic love of ourself as a child of God, as a creature, as someone dependent on God. And in loving ourselves in God, we're free then to love others because we've allowed the light and the mercy of God to penetrate us, and we become conduits, instruments of that for others. Those are the 4 levels of loving. Sometimes I feel like I'm in all 4 at different points in the day or the year, but our goal is to move towards that highest point of loving God for God's sake and loving self for God's sake. Today, as we celebrate the Feast of Bernard, we thank the Lord for his wisdom. St. Bernard, pray for us.